Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for those of you that are on for trusting the Headhunters and Logan HR with your valuable time. And for those guests on our call today that have either been on prior webinars that we've hosted or that have worked with us in the past, you guys know that adding value to our clients is our #1 priority at the Headhunters. And for those of you that are new to us, we're very glad to have you join us. We hope today is valuable for you. Before I introduce you to Dr. Howie Outerbridge, there are just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. There'll be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. But if you should have any burning questions, please feel free to post them into the chat panel in Zoom. It's on the right-hand side. And what we'll try to do is we'll try to address as many of those questions as possible at the end of his presentation. After today's webinar, an email will be sent out. Expect that in your inbox sometime tomorrow. And that'll go out to all the attendees with a link to the recording to the webinar. It'll include the audio and the presentation slides. Our theme today is how to terminate employees, the do's and don'ts. And this is a hot topic for a lot of us in leadership roles. So we've invited Dr. Howie Outerbridge, VP Client Services at Logan HR, to talk to us today about how to plan an effective termination meeting. This would include some concrete suggestions on timing, messaging, the logistical do's and don'ts. And Dr. Outerbridge has got 15 years of experience in learning, career exploration, and the development of people in a variety of settings. He works with organizations to consult on a range of topics, anything from career management, downsizing, and leadership solutions. Logan HR Management consults in career transition, organizational development, and compensation, and has helped hundreds of organizations with their human capital needs. With that, we're very proud to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Howie Outerbridge. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be on this call today, and thank you, Danielle, for the introduction. You know, it's great to be here speaking to you all about something that I do have a tremendous amount of experience in. And so this is, you know, today we are talking about terminating employees and how to do this so that your business maintains its functionality, but that also that the individual that has been notified that they're no longer part of the company leaves with dignity and respect. So really that is the focus of our webinar today. Okay, so the agenda today then, we're going to start off looking at with or without cause, because this is something that comes up often for organizations that are planning. You know, they have someone that they're not sure whether they, which road they need to go down. The focus of today's webinar is without cause, and I will spend a little bit of time to outline the primary differences. We'll also be walking through the objectives of the termination meeting, what you want to accomplish. You're going to hear me say over and over and over again how important it is to plan this out, to map out every little single step that you can. We're going to be looking at managing employee reactions, which, you know, are things that we can't really predict with certainty. So we want to make sure that we're planning for as many options as possible. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the role of a career transition consultant, and then we'll wrap up with a top 10 list and some final thoughts for you. So I know that you will finish today with some concrete ideas, some things to keep in mind. And again, this is based on my experience helping organizations with these difficult meetings. And I can tell you that I've been in over 100 of these notification meetings during my time in the human capital space. So again, I can say that I think that I've seen a range of situations, a range of not only employee reactions, but I've seen it planned very well, and I've seen it planned very poorly. So coming back to the importance of planning today. The objectives. So today, when you leave, you'll have a better understanding of termination meetings, do's and don'ts. You'll have some resources available that will help you in planning, and that top 10 list is really a summary of everything we're talking about. And you'll also end with a better understanding of the key issues for both the employee, but also the employer. So we're going to start off this webinar, and webinars are you can't have a webinar without some polls. And so if we were all in a big room together, I'd be asking you to put your hand up. Instead, we're going to be using the technology here to get a sense of your comfort level with conducting termination meetings. So have a look at the poll. 1 indicates no experience and potentially high anxiety with these kinds of meetings. This is your ability to plan and deliver. 5 indicates lots of experience, high comfort. So this will give me a sense of how much experience we have on the call. I'll give you a moment to do that. So while we're waiting for the poll, I'll just maybe say a few more things just about the comfort level. You know, for people that have done a lot of these meetings, you really shouldn't feel comfortable. You really shouldn't feel comfortable. I mean, these are meetings that are going to keep you up at night, the night before. So it looks like we have our results here, and so you can see that we have 19% are on the low experience, low and high anxiety, and we have at the other end we have 5% who have lots of experience. So the majority of you are in that middle ground, 37% being 3. So again, these are meetings where you're changing someone's life, and you should. Obviously, most of us being in human resources or working with people, there's a lot of stress involved. Okay, so let's look at with or without cause. And first we're going to look at without cause. So without cause, letting somebody go without cause in Canada, according to the Employment Standards Act, a company can let an employee go at any time without cause, as long as they compensate them properly. So without cause is the most common scenario that we run into when people are terminated. It is the focus of today's webinar. And reasons typically include downsizing, shortage of work, lack of fit. These are the most common things that we come across. When we look at without cause, which is not the focus of today's webinar, and I'm specifically stating that because my background does not include law, employment law, etc. And this is really where I would strongly encourage you to seek legal counsel or counsel from a certified human resources practitioner. So much less common than without cause. People are let go with cause often for due to performance, illegal activities, gross negligence, etc. And I have a couple examples here for you. BC Labor Relations Code would be one, and I'm calling in here from sunny Vancouver. So BC Labor Relations Code would be one resource, and then of course the Employment Standards Act is another resource for you. Okay, so let's get into talking about terminations. Really, these are an emotionally charged meetings, and not just for the individual that is receiving the news. For those of you that have been a part of these meetings, it's emotional for everyone. The manager who's delivering the news, it may be just one person delivering the news, but these are tough meetings to conduct. Often they're conducted in a tense atmosphere. Stakes are high. You know, you have a business that you need to continue to run, but it's also a decision that is necessary to maintain your business lines. So there's a lot of confidentiality, of course, that comes into play here when you are planning these meetings. You know, if the person that's delivering the news might have a meeting with that person at the beginning of the week that they're terminating, and they need to keep that information confidential. So it can lead to, again, higher levels of stress. So we're going to do another poll here. What I'd like to do is just to get a sense from you, how many of you have been involved in some way with a termination meeting? So you've either delivered the news, you've assisted in delivering the news, you've received the news yourself, so you might have been let go, downsized, etc., or even a close friend or family members. So check all that apply, and we'll give you a second to complete this. So there's some great questions that are coming in on the chat, and I know we have someone that is managing that. And, you know, with this process, I will say, as we're waiting for the numbers to come in, and looks like they have, that these are incredibly complicated situations, and it's impossible to account for all of the variables involved. There's a great question from Andrew about unions. You know, we have collective agreements, we have associations. So really today we're going to cover as much as we possibly can to get people feeling more comfortable about the termination meeting. But please remember to consult the resources, whether it's an employment lawyer, you know, a human resource practitioner, etc. Okay, so let's look at the results. The results were just actually taken down, so I didn't get a chance to look at them quickly, but it did look, oh, there they are, they're back up again. So really, we are in a different time now. You know, it's 2017. We have things like the tech bubble bursting, we have the economy changing, we have global recessions, and terminations and termination meetings are a part of doing business now. 20 years ago, it wasn't the case. So where I'm going with this is that there's a huge number of you that have either delivered the news, you've assisted in delivering the news, or 78% of you, look at this, know a close friend or family member who has been terminated. So, you know, when I talk to my friends in recruiting, they actually, if you haven't been let go or restructured or downsized, they kind of look at you with a little bit of a suspicious look. They would often say it's actually a badge of honor. So I'm sharing this because, you know, yes, it's a very difficult thing to plan and deliver, but it is a part of doing business now. Okay, let's look at some objectives of the day. So if we look at objectives for the employee, you want to make sure that they hear and understand the message. You want to make sure that they know what comes next. And finally, you want to make sure that they leave with their head held high. You know, they feel in leaving that they've contributed to the success of the business. On the employer side, and again, we're running businesses here, and risk mitigation is so important. So you want to make sure that first of all, that the employee is getting home safe, that they're leaving the premises and you have everything that you need from them and they have everything that they need from you, as in company property, access cards, cell phones, etc. We'll talk about that in a few slides here. Brand reputation, of course, is so critical today. Social media. I mean, let's look at United Airlines as an example. And so planning a termination meeting, treating employees with dignity and respect can really do a lot to maintain the integrity of your brand. A few other comments here then about for the objectives. Again, you are running a business, so the individuals that are left that haven't been notified, you know, you'll want to connect with them as soon as possible to let them know business is going to continue to run. You value their contributions, and a change was needed for whatever reason, whether it was business continuity or restructuring, etc. Now, keep in mind that remaining employees, there's been a lot of literature that's been written on survivor syndrome. So people that are left may be a little bit out of sorts. They might be thinking, why me? Why not? Why am I left? And so, you know, be aware that things may take a couple of days for things to get back to normal, but by addressing and being transparent and open with the remaining employees, you can get things back on track. Okay, so let's look at planning the actual meeting, and there are a lot of considerations here to think about. So let's walk through a few things. So first is departure considerations. Do you want them to leave immediately? As in today is their last day? Is there working notice that might come into play? And it's impossible to answer that question without knowing a bit more about your organization and what you've done in the past, business continuity, needs, etc. Keep in mind, of course, things like anniversaries, you know, the election day that's coming up, divorce, personal issues that come up for people. So these are also important things to consider when planning the actual event and when it's going to take place. Positioning, so we talked about the difference between without cause and cause. Positioning for without cause is typically restructuring, fit, going in a different direction, business need, etc. So a couple other things to consider: severance and documentation, of course. When the individual is notified, it's important that they have all of the information about their either lump sum or their salary continuance, or whatever that's going to look like. A lot of thinking is going to need to go into that. The letter needs to be obviously triple checked. I've seen certainly instances where individuals have come into our office after being notified, and there's an error in the letter. They're either getting more money or they're getting less money than anticipated. So double, triple check that, absolutely. Okay, logistics again. People often ask, when is the best time to notify an employee that their role is being eliminated? So we typically coach organizations to say midweek, usually earlier in the day than later. And I'll tell you why. Friday is absolutely the worst possible day to let somebody go. One being that they may not have access to their support network over the course of the weekend, physicians, counselors, etc. But I think a more important factor here is social media, right? So you let someone go at the end of the day of Friday, and what do they do over the course of the weekend? There's this social media frenzy that develops, and then you've got damage to control to take care of on a Monday. So we normally say midweek, earlier than later. Once the individual is notified, then notify the rest of the individuals as quickly as possible. This sort of goes without saying, but certainly a quiet place, a confidential place, avoid interruptions during the termination meeting, close the door, turn off your phone, etc. Company property comes up quite regularly, of course. So things like keys, pass cards, do they have a parking pass? If they do, where is that going to be? Is it going to be in the individual's car? Are they going to have to get access to that to get access to their car? Did they ride their bike? How did they get to work that day? So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. I would say that with the company property, one thing that I've noted recently, I'd say in the last year, maybe 2 years, is people's phones. And so if your organization provides your employees with a phone, then you should assume that that is going to be their lifeline to the outside world. They're probably going to have their personal contacts. They're probably going to be using it as their primary phone. But in a meeting, when stress is high and people are being notified that their role is being eliminated and their life is going to change, the last thing that you want to do is take their phone away from them. So this is an important consideration to factor into how you plan this out. I guess another thing I'll mention just on this slide is options for exit. And it's funny when I meet people, they'll say, "Oh yeah, Howie, you're that up in the air guy. You're that George Clooney guy, escorting people out of the building." Now, you have to consider that. Why are they escorted out of the building? And we're going to do a poll here in a couple of minutes just to get a sense of your culture, your company's culture. But again, you are running a business, you are mitigating risk, you are protecting the integrity of your data. And in some cases, having a person escorted out of the building might be the only way that you can do it. I will tell you, from a humanistic perspective and as a counselor, that people, when they're notified of job loss, are not at their best. They almost, and if you've delivered the news before, you'll know that as soon as you tell them that their position is being eliminated effective immediately, they really shut down and they may not hear anything else that you have to say. So, my role being on site and helping people collect their belongings or making sure that they have what they need and getting them to their car or to a taxi, they actually really appreciate that support. And they may not want to go and say goodbye to their coworkers at that point. So again, lots of options for exit depending on your culture. Well, again, we'll do a quick activity here in a second. Let's look at some other things that come into place. Security. I'll just zero in on computer access and just tell you a story that actually happened earlier this week. So we were consulting with an organization. They decided that they were going to let somebody go on the Monday, and IT went ahead and cut the person's access to the network on Saturday. And so the individual who was being terminated on Sunday hopped online and was trying to get access and couldn't. So what they called the IT helpline, and there was a huge miscommunication, and the person was told that, oh, we had heard that you resigned, so we cut your access. So again, a good example here, there's got to be you know, a box in your planning on your planning sheet that you check and double check that ensures that you're cutting the individual's access off to the network at the right time. Security, again, with extreme situations, I would say advisable to have a security person or service on site in a sort of off to the side, not highly visible. If you're dealing with someone who is prone to fits of anger or has exhibited outbursts, physical outbursts in the workplace, so that's something to consider as well. The career transition support, so the middle part of the slide here. So, you know, there are lots of firms out there like ours that will help you with planning the event, being on site for the event, and then of course supporting the individual through their career transition for whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, etc. So think of career transition support as being another way that you can support your employee, but also support you in planning and delivering this meeting. Okay, this is another audience participation as part of the webinar. So what I'd like you to do in the chat is I'd like you to pick 3 words that you would use to describe the culture of your organization. And again, I'd like you to type these right into the chat window. Okay, we're looking for some comments here. Okay, so I'm seeing fairness, value, truthfulness, dynamic, entrepreneurial, high performing, positive, fun. Okay, great. So lots of really good, and it's funny because there's a range here. I'm not seeing consistently, you know, one side or the other. Quality, positive, fair. So these are things, you know, organizations have a unique culture, and the culture comes into play when you're planning how the person will be let go. And I'll tell you, again, I used the George Clooney escorting the person out the door. Unfortunately, that's sometimes when you've got high stakes, again, data integrity, risk mitigation to consider, that may be your alternative, maybe your only alternative. So we see that in law firms, we see that in large crown corporations. Now, the other, obviously, way to do this too is to have the individual return to their desk, or to give them a chance to say goodbye to their coworkers if they want to. And so this might be appropriate for smaller organizations. It might be more appropriate for organizations that are maybe there's an extremely high degree of trust with the individuals that work there. So these are factors to consider. You don't have to do whether it's the escorting out the door or, you know, puppies and rainbows, hugs and kisses at the end. It's really going to depend on the culture of your organization. But keep in mind things like intellectual property, email. You know, we had a situation where an individual went back to their desk after being notified, sat down and sent an email to all customers. So again, we're running a business here, right? Things like hardware, planting viruses, etc. Okay, let's get into the, thanks for the some really great words that were being shared there, relaying the culture of your organizations. So let's look at delivering the message. Again, who's the right person to deliver the news? Generally, it's the person's manager. We would encourage them to get right to the point. and stick to the message. And I've got a sample script here that I'll show you, and it's remarkable how brief it actually is. But really the role of the manager is to deliver the news, keep things moving along, thank the person for their service, and then leave and let, if there's HR support there or a career transition consultant, just to turn that next phase of the meeting over to the individual. For those of you that have done media training, you'll know, and by media training, I mean, you're the face of the organization for news interviews or reporters. And reporters are notoriously good at getting you to say things that you don't want to say. And if you've done any sort of media training, what the person that's training you will teach you to do is have 3 or 4 key messages that you stick to. And the same would go for a termination meeting. The key messages are really, this is a very difficult decision. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. We want to thank you for your work, and our HR representative will walk you through what comes next. And if you do get questioned, those are your 3 key messages that you stick to. So here's the script that I mentioned, and thank you, Colleen mentioned or just asked about the sample script here. So here is the manager's message. Short and very brief, but contains all the information that we would suggest you need to have contained. Again, back to the media training. If the manager is questioned, look, Susan, this was a very difficult decision for us to make, but it is final. I want to thank you for your time here, and Megan will walk you through what comes next. The manager would then stand up, shake the person's hand, whatever is appropriate, and then exit the room. So at that point, we would typically encourage HR or whoever is in the HR capacity to take over. And HR's message really is outlining the severance and the support. They are introducing, if there is a career transition package that's a part of the severance, they'll relay that to the information to the individual. Company property, phone, laptop, access cards, etc. So the next point I will just maybe explore a little bit, explain options for collecting personal belongings. And let's just sort of use an analogy that maybe most of us can relate to, that of being breaking up with your girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, whatever. And let's say that it's, you're staying at their place, you've got some things at their place, you break up, and so on the way out the door, you might grab your toothbrush or your favorite mug, but that is not the time to go through all of your drawers, to pack things up. What we want to do with these meetings and the termination meeting is we want the individual to leave at the end of the day with everything that they need to leave. And if you just heard a loud bang, everything is okay. I did not fall off of my desk. So back to this, back to the HR message. So ideally, we want to give the individual, make sure that they have everything that they need to leave for the day, but we also want to make sure that we're making sure that they're leaving in a timely way and that business can get back to normal. And then we would encourage the individual to come back at a time that they can pick and choose when they will have some time to pack up their belongings. I would say a big do not, so this is a big do not, is let them go back to their desk and start to pack up their desk in an open environment. I've been through many of these meetings before, and when people are just received news like that, they're in a state of shock, and they will want to sit down and go through a box of paper clips and pick out which clips are theirs and which ones belong to the company. So again, this is a very cathartic process that people need to go through. But what I'm saying is, don't let them have that catharsis, but I'm saying don't let that happen in the middle of a busy work office in the middle of the day. Let them come back after hours or on the weekend in a supervised way and have that and go through that process. Okay, so let's talk about managing employee reactions. So this is really is something that I know a little bit about as a counselor, as a professional counselor. And so what I'd like you to do, this is audience participation. Let's see, audience participation here. So I'd like you to, in the chat, what are some reactions that you could expect from an individual? So this might be, you know, you've decided to join the webinar because you have to plan one of these meetings. So think about the person you'd be notifying. What do you think they're going to do? How will they react? Or if you've delivered the news, what are some reactions that you've seen firsthand? Okay, I see anger, outrage, shock, crying, fear, tears, laughter, denial, relief. Okay, so really we are going to see the, we're going to see a range. We are going to see a range of emotions. Why me? Silence. We've got lots of, again, this is the range of human emotions. And I do want to sort of, again, if we draw it out on a spectrum and we say on one end we have anger, fear, we have shock, confusion, but at the same time, people have hugged me in these meetings. People have given me high fives in these meetings. They are so relieved that they don't have to come to work and do a job that they don't enjoy, which is often the reason why if you have to pick one of 10, they're the ones that are being picked. So this is an important part of this presentation in that you need to manage employee reactions. When we look at the, and we rate how people go through change and how change can contribute to illness, the number one thing, of course, and you probably may have heard this, is the number one life factor or life change for people that can cause them the most stress and grief is the death of a spouse. Next, and this is by Holmes and Ray, their stress scale, divorce, marital separation. But surprisingly, dismissal from work is 7th on the list, 7 out of 43 potential life changes. So these are significant changes for people. Some things to keep in mind. Again, this is adding to your specifics on do's and don'ts. So in these meetings, you want to respect privacy. A quiet room, it's off to the side. It's not their office and it's not your office. Based on the reactions that came in through the chat, be ready for silence and use silence as a way to let the person process what they're hearing. Restating the message might be necessary, but stick to the core message. Don't add any extra things in that you need to. Do provide structure. And so again, the meetings that I've been a part of, people really, they don't know what to do. They don't know whether they can go back to the fridge and grab their lunch. They don't know whether they can, often they'll say, you know, I just have to go back and send a couple of emails. And they don't understand that effective immediately the role is they no longer have access to their the network, and they don't have access to company property anymore. So you have to help them through this process. The don'ts: defend, justify, or argue. Certainly not the case, not the time or the place. You do want to give people a chance to have those kinds of conversations, but in this termination meeting, that is not what's on the agenda. Minimizing things, you know, hey, you're going to be okay, and it's not as bad as it may seem. People don't want to hear that. Drag meetings on too long. So a big part of this is keeping the flow going and keeping the flow of the meeting and the process going. Okay, the next, what I'd like to do next is I want to introduce a few scenarios that are very, they could be real. In fact, of the 100 meetings that I've been a part of, I would say a few of these are extremely real. And I want you to, by sharing these scenarios, these 3 scenarios, I want you to have a look at the scenario and use the chat to answer some of the questions at the bottom of the slide. So this is a termination scenario. You are informing Yaz that her position is being eliminated. So there's a little bit about Yaz. So the questions to you are, how do you think she will react to the news? What needs to be considered in delivering the news? And what special arrangements might you make with Yaz? So feel free to, okay, so I'm hearing looking in the chat here, upset, worried, anxious, yeah. Dan is saying that she will be very upset. And she'll be very upset because she's been with the company for 15 years. You know, her partner was just laid off. She has 3 kids. She's the sole breadwinner in the family. And so there are lots of complications here. Okay, so I want to just highlight, so Dan mentioned arrangements, offering a ride home. You know, this would be something that you should do for all of your termination meetings. Offer an individual the option to get a taxi home. So Dan is also mentioning here, someone in the room, in our webinar story, offer a transition counselor. And again, whether it's a transition counselor or a transition consultant, giving her a chance, once she's been informed of the news, once she's been given her package, to just spend 10 to 15 minutes with someone and either cry or talk it out. Yeah. Okay, I want to just highlight something here that Nicholas has mentioned. So he's mentioned compensation for her. So recommend that she take salary continuance instead of lump sum. And believe it or not, when people are let go, they often don't realize that they will continue to be compensated for a certain period of time. Now, we all know employment standards provides that basic framework, but common law suggests, I'm going to say 2 to 4 weeks of service or of comp per year of service. So based on her 15 years of service, she could expect 30 weeks of salary continuance. She could expect more. She could expect much more. So absolutely. So special considerations, I would say, you know, considering a possible flight risk, she might just want to jump in her car and take off. Knowing that she commutes over 90 minutes each way, getting someone behind the wheel after an emotionally charged meeting like this is not a good idea. So the other thing would be making sure that she understands salary continuance and some sort of support. Okay. Thank you for all really, really good comments coming in on the chat. So let's look at the second termination scenario. So this is Phil. So Phil, keeping it, captain of the UBC rugby team. So certainly, back to the webinar participants, yes. So I'm getting people suggesting rage, disbelief, violence, anger, frustration, outbursts. Yeah, you know, I mean, you never really know what the person is going to do. However, in this case, absolutely, you guys are right on track by suggesting possible anger issues. So a security guard should be present. In this case, that sounds like a great idea. Just being conscious of time here, I would also suggest, you know, people are going to be, his ex-wife and the new partner both work in the firm or the company. So you want to be connecting with them. Maybe they take the afternoon off. Certainly, once the meeting has taken place, letting them know, or in a confidential way, letting them know that this meeting is going to happen. So there are lots of ways to stick handle that, but certainly considering that is vital in this scenario. You know, the other thing, and I'll just wrap up this scenario here with this last comment, is that you don't know how people are going to react. So Phil might actually be relieved. He might be relieved because he hates his job and he hasn't hit his targets in 10 months and it's been eating him alive. He's hated seeing his ex-wife and the partner develop this new relationship in the cafeteria, and he's actually really happy that he can that he's got a bit of a paid vacation. So you're never really sure what's going to happen. But my message here is plan for everything. Okay, a couple minutes about, and then we'll wrap up our webinar here. So career transition consultants, I've mentioned this in planning your meeting, consider your resources and tapping into your experts, your employment lawyers, your HR practitioners, and a career transition consultant to help you, especially if you're worried about the person, like a Yaz or a Phil, etc. We typically spend 10 to 20 minutes with the person after the news. We act as a bit of a shepherd, a bit of a coach to help them through the process. We check in on them. We make sure they get home safe and sound. So think of us as part counselor, part paramedic, part coach, and part guide. Just 2 more slides here and then we'll wrap up. So after the meeting, again, it's important that the rest of the employees understand that a change has occurred, why it's occurred, and do that in a transparent way. Things like voicemail, email, reception, external contacts, make those changes as well so that the business, the continuity of the business is maintained. So that really brings us to the end of our webinar, and we've covered a lot of content here today. I certainly don't want you to think that these are simple meetings to plan. If you feel overwhelmed or like, holy smokes, I've got a whole page of things here, then that's good. That's great. So a couple of things to remember here. So think about how the individual will take the news. Will they be mad? Will they be happy? Will they be relieved? Most people are shocked. Most people are process it in a unique way to them. So they might be quiet, or they might be mad, or they might have questions. So always start with how the individual will take the news. Keep the process confidential. Pick the right date. I guess the last thing here that I'll highlight, because we really covered all of these already, is work as a team. And if you are working with a manager to plan a meeting like this, then role play and script it out and look at logistics and do a start to finish dry run through it all. Is the room that you've chosen in the right location? Things like, again, the parking pass. I remember one individual that I worked with, I actually had to go down with him into his car, and we had to drive out of the parkade because he needed access to his card, and I needed access to the parking pass. So these are things that only come up when you go through them top to bottom. So my final thought here, we do have some time for questions, but final thought really is that most companies, most of your companies, put a lot of emphasis on treating people well when they're hired. And truly excellent companies also do a great job when it's time to part ways. And with that, I will turn it back to my co-host.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. Although I think many of us on the call have had to, have some sort of, I liked your wording, transitional meeting with someone, I think you called it. Notification meeting. It doesn't make it any easier because you really are impacting somebody's life. And so great tips. So thank you. We do have a couple of questions. I know Nicholas has asked one question twice. So I'd like to start with his question. He asked about individuals that are part of a union. When a union is involved, do you need a reason to terminate a person? Because it sounds like, and I haven't had a lot of exposure to union environments, but it sounds like it might be a little bit more tricky to manage. Could you explain on that one?
Yeah, I will, Danielle. It's a great question. Thanks, Nicholas. And so, again, most of the experiences that I've had have not involved union employees. So there will be a collective agreement that lays things out, that talks about how this happens, right? So I would say the first, adding to your list of experts that you want to consult with is your HR contact, or whoever typically interacts and communicates with the union. So really, that would be probably the first thing to do, because you're right, it's a different, unique set of circumstances, and there are hundreds of different unions out there. So Nicholas, that's all I could say about that, except for if you are planning a termination meeting for a union member, it's going to be a bit more complicated.
Thank you. Another question from one of our other guests. What is your recommendation for employees that are going through or that you know are going to go through a bit of an emotional roller coaster ride? So I guess we talked about the individuals that have anger issues, but what about those that are just extremely volatile? Are there any thoughts as to whether we should cut that conversation short or whether we should assist them through the process? Any ideas on that would be helpful.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so the employee history is going to be important here, and that top 10 list, the first question, how will the employee react? So if they do have a history of emotional outbursts or tears, or they have a reputation in the organization for being someone who has a box of tissues in their office. So that's going to, again, give you a few things, some insight into how they might react. So based on that, I would say, when you're planning the room, the meeting, know that they almost count on them being emotional. So having Kleenex in the room, having it in a meeting place where it's not all glass, so that they can cry. Getting to your point or your question, right? So do you give them the opportunity to emote and to go through that roller coaster ride in front of you, or do you cut it short and pop them in a cab and get them home? And the answer to that is you need to let them go through that emotional state. And often what will happen, though, is people get to the end, right? It might be a 30-minute or a 40-minute cry session, but then ultimately they're ready to go. They want to leave. They want the comfort of their home. They want to call their partner or whatever it is. And so the meetings that I've been a part of that people have been extremely emotional, you listen, you wait for them in a safe place for them to process, and then you make sure that they're getting home safely.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions. I don't know that we're going to get to all of them today, but we'll do our best. What about when an employee has access to a company cell phone or a company computer? What's the best way to retrieve that cell phone or computer and get the information off it?
Yeah, okay, so that's, again, just is a really good point, right? And it adds to the long list of variables that are maybe unique to your organization. So I would say, from what I've seen, often people don't show up to a meeting like this with their laptops. If they are in sales and they're used to meeting their manager at a coffee shop, then they might, right? So you might have that case. I guess there is, most organizations that I've worked with, there is a high degree of trust with the individual. So often organizations will allow the person to send the actual hardware in, or they'll send a courier over to their place to pick it up. However, that being said, there is also the IT component. So often IT will be able to limit their access to the database or any sort of IP, intellectual property that the person may have access to. So it's best to collect everything at the same time. And again, these are things that you want to sort of talk through with the person that you're planning the meeting with to figure out the best possible way to do it.
Great, thank you. And one of our guests who wasn't actually able to be on today's call had asked if we would ask you the question, what would be the best approach in terminating a staff member who has a relative in the company, and that particular relative who works for the organization is a very strong member of the team? Any advice on that?
Yeah, it's that's a tough one. Maybe I speak from experience with a few similar situations. So situations where, 2 weeks ago, we had a situation where an individual was being let go as part of a fairly large downsizing. His wife worked for the company, and he wasn't sure whether she was being impacted or not in the change. And so what we were able to do was, work with the HR director who was managing the downsizing, find out as quickly as possible whether his wife was impacted or not, and then we were able to let him know so that he could at least leave feeling like, okay, this is okay. We also let the wife know to take the rest of the day off so that they could be together. So in this case, I would say, once the person's notified, you could give them the option, like, do they want to have the strong team member that they're related to come in and spend some time with them, or do they want to just leave and reach out on their own? Or So I guess it depends really on how the person would react, and trying to figure out whether adding that extra body to the meeting or at the end of the meeting, what impact that would have on the individual.
Wow, that's wow. Thank you. And the great thing, and the consistency that we saw, even with how people view their environments and some of the comments we've had, there's so much empathy. We really do. Although we have businesses to run, we really do care about how that employee exits the organization, and obviously minimizing any kind of reaction or really supporting them through it. The process can really help. I think for the sake of time, we promised everybody that we'd wrap things up close to 12. I'm going to ask one more question for one of our guests, and this is an interesting one for a lot of people on the call. But the question is, are there any differences to terminating an hourly paid employee versus a salaried employee?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, let's see. Okay, so if we figure out, I guess the question is whether they are indeed an employee or whether they are a contractor, sole proprietor running their own business. But as far as I know, if they are defined as an employee by employment standards, then there shouldn't be any difference. If they're hourly and they're not spending a lot of time with the organization, obviously you're not going to support them in the same way you would from a lump sum or a salary continuance standpoint as you would a full FTE that's been with the company for 10 years. But if they are an employee of the company, then you would most likely, without looking at all of the details, treat them in the same manner.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I know that we still have some questions coming in. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for the fantastic participation. I just quickly want to make a comment that for those of you that have additional questions relative to today's webinar, you're welcome to contact us, and we can be reached at the Headhunters on our email, which I see is on the screen, at connect@theheadhunters.ca. We'd be happy to pass any of the questions over to Howie and his team. But with regards to today's conversation, and again, thank you, Howie. This has been so insightful. And again, for some of us that have had to do this, unfortunately, a number of times in our career, I don't know about the rest of you, but I certainly took away quite a bit today. So thank you. An email is going to be sent out to all of you tomorrow with a link to the recording. If you don't see an email within 24 hours, check your junk or your spam folder. You'll also see a survey. There it is on the screen. If you could just give us some feedback. We want to make sure that we continue to add value to you. So just that couple seconds just to fill in the feedback form will be very helpful for us in being able to identify your thoughts and feelings and what we should do moving forward. And then everyone who was on our call today, you guys are going to be entered into a draw, and one individual will win a free virtual coaching session with Logan HR's Senior Organizational Development Consultant. Her name is Tracy Moser, and we'll actually be contacting the winner of the draw directly tomorrow. So again, thank you very, very much. This is certainly a very generous offer from Logan. Appreciate it, Howie. And again, to all of you, thank you so much for your valuable time. We look forward to seeing you. Our next free webinar is going to be hosted on May 24th. It'll be hosted by hosted by the Headhunters, but our guest will be Go Productivity, Laurie Schmidt, who is the CEO, and the topic will be on how to invest in your people to drive continual productivity. Again, thank you so much for your valuable time, and enjoy the rest of your day.